Hi, everybody. Welcome to Great Career Bang's Nonprofit Career Network. I'm Matt Hugg, president and founder of Nonprofit.Courses. And today we have a very interesting, very special guest. We have Meridian Swift. Meridian is a very long experience volunteer manager. She has her own volunteer management consulting firm, and she is host of the popular podcast Volunteer Plain Talk. She's going to be talking about how volunteering integrates well into somebody's career, whether they're in transition, between jobs, or whether they are in the thick of their career and doing their day-to-day work, and how volunteering can help in both of those cases. So let's get started. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Great Careers Bang's presentation this month of the Nonprofit Career Network. And today we have a very special guest. We have Meridian Swift. And Meridian is the host of a very popular podcast about volunteering called Volunteer Plain Talk. And rather than my getting in and kind of stumbling on an introduction here, Meridian, why don't you tell us about yourself and what got you into working as somebody who advises nonprofits on volunteers?
Well, thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody, and I appreciate your being here, and thank you for inviting me. Volunteering obviously is something I'm very passionate about, and it was my chosen career, still is. And a little bit about me. I have been in the volunteer field for about 25 years, a little more than 25 years now. I hold the CVA, which is Certified Volunteer Administrator credential. I've had that for the past 15 years, renew it every 5 years. I've written 2 books on volunteer management. As Matt says, I have a podcast called Volunteer Plain Talk. I also have a blog, Volunteer Plain Talk. I've been on national committees. I've done a lot of research and all this kind of good stuff. So I'm very involved, still involved. I'm involved with the Engage Journal, which is a national and actually international journal for volunteer management, et cetera, et cetera. But Matt asked me to talk about volunteering in your career path. So I wanted to kind of put all that, who I am and whatever aside and talk more about what do I know about, volunteering in a career path. And I'm going to talk to you like, this is something you want to learn about so that maybe when you talk to people who consider volunteering as something to enhance their careers, that you might give them some really good advice from things I've learned. And instead of, all this other stuff I talked about, I'm tapping into my experiences with volunteers and how it intersected with their career path. So by that, I mean, who have I worked with that this is a subject that would have come up? And so all these different types of volunteers were volunteers that volunteering was part of a utilization for them to enhance and further their career. For instance, transitioning volunteers, people who transitioning job or career to career would volunteer with us. And just so you know, the majority of my volunteer experience was in a hospice, so I will probably refer to that because that's what I know deeply. But hospice is a huge organization with a lot of volunteers, so you get a lot of experience with a lot of different types of volunteering there. I've had student volunteers, and for them, they don't have a lot of work experience. And so on their resumes, especially for getting into the college of their choice, they would list volunteering. And I actually had a young lady come back and seek me out to let me know that her volunteering at our hospice was the single tipping point for getting her into her dream college. So this is how important volunteering can be. I've had displaced workers, plenty of them. And if you think back to around 2008, 2009, when we had the recession, we had in our community a tremendous amount of laid off workers. And that was a really trying time for everyone. And I can remember in particular one woman who came to volunteer. She had been laid off looking for a job for several months. And she was one of the most brokenhearted individuals I had ever met, honest to goodness. And so she came, and it became a challenge for us not only just to give her something to do, but to see how we could be kind of a cheering squad for her. And a lot of volunteer management is about coaching and mentoring. And so that put us to the test. And after a few months of volunteering with us, she hadn't found a job yet, but she sat down with me one day and she says, you know what? This is the first time in a long time that I felt like I mean something to someone. And those are powerful words. Now I've had visa volunteers, and these are volunteers who come from other countries, and maybe their partner, spouse, whatever, has been relocated to the United States for a temporary period of time. And by law, they were not allowed to work in the United States, so they came and volunteered. And they might have not had English as, one of their primary languages, but boy, they toughed it out and came in and volunteered with us. And what they learned and what they experienced about learning about American culture and customs and how we do certain things here, they took back with them and put on their resume and utilized it for gaining better jobs and advancement in their own careers. I've had interns and internships, and interns have volunteered with me, and they've told me that they've learned more about management and about organizations than they did through their formal interning. Community service volunteers are another category that I had plenty of. And with community service volunteers, it was interesting because I found that they weren't exactly transitioning from like one job to another, but they had an interruption in their lives because they were typically court ordered community service volunteers. So it became a challenge for us to be non-judgmental and to be supportive with them as they worked through why they were there, and they were able to gain something that they could utilize moving forward. And finally, CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, plenty of volunteer groups that came in and wanted to volunteer for their companies, for PR, for, team building and things of that nature. So they would come and we would try to figure out, a very mutually beneficial plan for volunteering so they could utilize that. So that's an entire category where volunteering intersects with something more than just, I want to give back and be a good person. Now, in talking about volunteering, I kind of came up with four areas. I could talk about how volunteering is good for you, good for the soul, because I believe that, I've witnessed it, I'm passionate about that, but you already know that. So I'm going to put that aside and talk more about how do you frame volunteering so that it works for you. And you can give this advice to anyone you're talking about too, because this is really important, okay? And I kind of came up with four different little subsets that kind of complement each other. One would be, how does it enhance your resume? Another one would be, let's do something we can talk about knowledgeably. And another one would be how to match your skills to company values. And then finally, the one that I find most important, because I personally think this is the most important thing in the volunteer world, is what is the impact? Because why volunteer if it's busy work? Why volunteer if it doesn't make a difference? Why volunteer if it doesn't have real results on the mission and the mission objectives? So those are the 4 issues or 4 areas that I kind of want to concentrate on. How do you connect with your volunteering? How does it connect to you so that you can frame it in a way that's beneficial? Okay. The first one is resume enhancers. And what I did was I just looked up some of the big names in the corporate world and what they're thinking as far as how do you enhance your resume. Well, Forbes will tell us that, and these are 3 of the things that Forbes says, and that I think we can really apply to volunteering, is focus on the future. That's one of the things. Put it in terms of what is this going to do for me in the future, which I think is really important. Forbes says that your resume is a marketing tool, and I think that's so true, because you're the commodity, you're the product, you're the thing that's being marketed. So how do you market yourself? And volunteering just fits in there so beautifully. And also show them the wow. I love this one. What is the wow? And we'll talk about that in just a second. And the volunteering can be the wow for sure if you let it. Indeed is another one that I checked out, and Indeed has several things to say about resumes. One is to add a summary, and what that says to me is use storytelling. And there's nothing more interesting about volunteering than telling a story, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Indeed also says to review the job description if you're applying for another job and research the company. And so how do you apply your volunteering to your company values? How do you apply volunteering to what your company is looking for if you're looking to move up in the company, if you're looking to change jobs, even if you just have a LinkedIn profile? How do I look valuable? And volunteering can certainly check all those boxes. And then finally, Indeed, it talks about employers are looking for soft skills and hard skills. And volunteering, if nothing else, will give you both those hard and soft skills. So you want to make sure that those are highlighted when you talk about your volunteering. Okay. And this is a Canva presentation. First time I've used Canva, but I kind of like it, but it doesn't work the same way that PowerPoint does. But anyway, go back to the wow factor. What is the wow factor? Well, when you're choosing a place to volunteer, you have to choose something that you can talk about with some sort of knowledge and hopefully with some sort of passion. Okay. So when choosing a volunteer area, what are you passionate about? What interests you? And it doesn't always have to be what the mission is that interests you. It can be, what skills can I bring that interest me? And so what can I talk about knowledgeably? What do I know about? So you want to make sure when you volunteer somewhere that you take notes, you ask questions, you read the brochures that they've done, you look at the mission statement, you figure out what are these people about, what are they trying to accomplish, and find a connection there. Do you believe in what they're doing? If you do, maybe you've had or know someone who's benefited from the services of this particular organization or mission. Maybe you just believe in what they're doing. And so that's where you connect, and that's where you can start tapping into the wow, because you're going to find the things that you can passionately explain that will give you that wow factor. And so I would say, though, be careful, because most people volunteer and what they'll say is, well, I'm interested in, let's say, animals, pets and animals. That's my passion. So immediately what do? They'll go into some sort of a volunteer site and they'll look for an organization whose mission is to take care of animals. And they'll stop there, go there, boom, we're done. But I'm here to tell you that organizations have subsets. I, as a volunteer manager at a hospice, had so many subsets that people who were interested in all kinds of different missions could find a place with me. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about hospice, you think about our mission, which is to take care of terminally ill or dying people. So if you're passionate about animals, would you necessarily look at a hospice? No, you wouldn't. But of course, we had a pet therapy program. So, oh, well, I could bring my love for animals to pet therapy on hospice. But I even went one step further. We had a program that the volunteers were in charge of, and we had a lot of patients who were terminally ill, but who were alone. And who is their companion? Their companion is their pet. They didn't have a lot of family around, they lived by themselves, and their best friend and confidant was their dog or their cat. And so, one thing that was extremely upsetting to them was at end of life thinking about what's going to happen to my best friend, my dog, or my cat. And so, our volunteers would foster these dogs and cats for our patients who were dying and take away that burden of wondering, is my dog, my cat going to go to a kill shelter while I die? So we had fostering, and that's a subset of volunteering that you might not think about, but once you got into hospice, you could utilize your passion there. I had volunteers who were musicians and writers and photographers and who were interested in veterans issues, because really we took care of everyone. And when you're in an organization, when you're being looked after in an organization or being taken care of, whatever, however you want to term it, there are many issues that you have going on besides just the mission itself. So all these subsets exist. One kind of weird off the wall one was I had carpenters, and our carpenters would build wheelchair ramps for our patients at their homes. But I also had a woodworking carpenter, and what he did is he would make boxes for ashes. He would make these boxes, and they weren't just boxes. He would actually woodwork them. He would etch pictures, names into these urn carriers for patients' families who, after the patient died, could not afford an expensive urn. So these are the subsets to be looking for. What am I passionate about? What can I bring? What skills do I have that I can bring to an organization that might not necessarily be one I chose first? So again, it's about matching skills. And so what we want to do when we're trying to frame our volunteering is look at our company, look at the company we want to work for, look at, our LinkedIn profile, and look for the values that everyone considers, valuable. And then we want to frame our volunteering within those values, because volunteering can fit within probably any company value at all. And then the other thing is, how do my skills relate? How do I relate hard and soft skills? And really, a lot of companies, probably most companies, are looking for leadership. And it might not be that they're looking for you to be the CEO, but they're looking for leadership in your department, leadership with other employees. So how do my skills, how do my passions, how does my volunteering make me a leader? And so you can fit that in so beautifully with just framing it in certain ways and looking at how the verbiage your company uses and just mimicking that in how you describe your volunteering. Some of the things that are very easily able to be shown would be things like commitment, things like problem solving, things like going the extra mile, things like being creative and innovative, things like completing a project from start to finish. And that could be technical soft skills, technical or hard skills, a lot of them. And then the soft skills are going to be how you relate to people who are experiencing some sort of trauma or challenge in your life. How do I relate to a team who's working on these problems that we're solving, these challenges that we're dealing with. And those are the soft skills. And when you start peppering in both of those, you're going to get a really clear picture of how much this volunteering has furthered you as a human being, how much you've grown through the experiences that you had at volunteering. So the first thing, and of course the most important to me, would be to ask for volunteer impact. And your volunteer manager is the person to go to. They will help you. We as volunteer managers, our main reason to be is to be a coach and a mentor for our volunteers. Our volunteers obviously don't get paid. They're rewarded with the impact they're making on the organization, furthering the organization's mission. So we will be able to help you determine impact. And that's the thing. I always put it together in a formula. So I'll talk about that in just a second, but you want that formula. You want to ask for testimonials and statistics. Believe me, organizations all have them, right? We compile them. I used to put them in my head. I would write them down, and I would be more than happy to share them with anyone who asks, because testimonials and statistics from staff members, other volunteers, the people that are being served speak volumes about the work and the impact that volunteering has on the mission. And so from there, you can create your own sort of return on investment. Again, this is going to be pretty much a formula where you will say, because I spent X number of hours doing XYZ, this is what was impacted. This was what was furthered. This is how we met mission goals. And if you look at the mission statement, it's usually typically broad. So let me just take like a typical hospice mission statement would be to provide end-of-life care for terminally ill patients. Okay, pretty broad. But then within mission statements, you're always going to have objectives and goals. And so by looking at the objectives and goals, that's where the ROI is going to come in. So let's go back to the volunteers who would foster someone's pet. So the mission statement is to care for terminally ill patients. Okay, but what are our objectives? Our objectives may be to provide psychosocial care so that that hospice patient can go about doing what they need to do at end of life. So then go back to the formula. I spent 4 hours, it was my turn. I spent 4 hours fostering a patient's dog, which met the objective of providing psychosocial care for a terminally ill patient at end of life, and that met the mission goal of providing care for terminally ill people. That's hard to say, terminally ill. So that becomes your formula for your return on investment. And then you can add in testimonials and statistics and to bolster all of that. So that's how you show impact for volunteering. I spent this number of hours doing this particular task, job, project. And why did that make a difference? What impact did that have? This is an article that I just read like 2 days ago, and I'm like, hey, this was spot on for what we're talking about. So I wanted to include a little bit of it here. And it's all about leadership. Companies want leaders, and people who volunteer, in a volunteer program or in companies typically will have a leg up on everyone else. And so the leg up becomes, to me, how do you frame your volunteering? How do you market this? How do you put this together so that it makes sense and makes you a valuable employee, person, whatever? And I would highly recommend, and you can pass this on to people that you mentor, I would highly recommend starting a volunteer program within a company. It's honestly a lot easier than it looks. I started one with my daughter-in-law at her company, and it was pretty darn easy. First step would be to survey other employees. Are you interested? Would this be something that you would feel good about doing? What are you passionate about? What issues in society are you interested in working on? And then you need to sell it to your company. You'll probably get some really great suggestions and whatnot. And then how does this match your company's values? What is your company passionate about solving? What issues? You can match it to that. But then I would highly recommend going to an organization and saying, look, we'd like to start a program. Can we sit down with the volunteer coordinator, volunteer leader, and see how we can work this out so it's mutually beneficial to all? One thing about corporate social responsibility and corporate volunteering that was difficult for me personally was when a corporate company would call me up and say, we've got 20 volunteers and we want to do something on a Saturday. Well, that's fine and dandy and whatnot, and we'll try and accommodate you, but why don't we sit down and figure out, first of all, what are you passionate about? What are the interests of the people who are going to be here? Let's work together so that we can find something mutually beneficial and not just do busy work and try to figure out as we go. Because corporate groups would show up, and then I would have to, first of all, apprise them of what our mission was and see if this fit with what they were working. So we wasted a lot of time in doing that when we could have just gotten right to work by doing all that upfront work. And so starting a corporate group of volunteers shows real leadership, creativity, innovation, shows that you're willing to, get PR out there, that your company is not just all about the bottom line, but actually interested in giving back to the community. So that's something I highly recommend. And you can start with just a couple of volunteers in your group. And I highly recommend actually starting with a small amount and then just growing from there. But it's a great way to show leadership. And I would definitely recommend that to anyone who is going to be looking for a leadership position within their company or a way to move up. And, I'd be remiss if I wouldn't tell you what we as volunteer managers are looking for. And we're really easy to get along with. So what we're basically looking for is sincerity, or maybe just call it honesty. Being honest with us, I can't even tell you how much we would so much rather someone be honest with us and say, I'm not willing to do this, I can't do this, I'm only available then, than just coming in and then quitting. I've had that happen. People are kind of afraid or embarrassed to say, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I'm not willing to do that. I would have so much rather that these people had just been upfront with me and said, here are my boundaries, here's what I want to get out of it, instead of quitting and leaving me hanging, wondering, what did we do wrong? Because then I can't fix it. So sincerity and honesty is the key to sitting down and figuring out how can we work on this together? And then you get that all out, hash it out, and then you can actually put something together. I can't give you all the time you're asking for. Okay, well, let's figure out how you can give the time that's good for you, but yet, we'll keep you because we want you to be there. Just a willingness to hear about our mission goals. We're here because we're passionate about our mission. We're passionate about what we do. So just a willingness to listen at least to who we are and why we're passionate about this subject. And then finally, of course, not being used or played. And I've been used or played many a time, and I learned from each one. I remember a woman who came along and she was gung-ho. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get into your organization. I'm like, great. And so I put her through orientation. And for me, my orientation was extensive, weeks long, and lengthy and in-depth, because I was placing volunteers with vulnerable patients. So they needed to have a lot of orientation, a lot of knowledge about how we did what we did. And she went through it. Oh, can't wait to get started. She volunteered one time and quit. I was like, what happened? What did we do wrong? I don't understand this. And then I learned later from someone else that she actually put all of this information on an application for a beauty pageant in our local town to be Mrs. whatever the town it was. And that was all she wanted from us. What a waste of my time. What a waste of our patients' time. I had another young man, charming young man, who was going to a local college in an advanced degree, and he had court-ordered community service, came to me all harried because he had exams and, internships and all kinds of things going on, and I wanted to help him, so I sat down and actually came up with a program, just for him, that he could do all these hours, and he could do it on his own time, in his own space and everything. And one day he came back, he said, oh my gosh, the judge is on my neck. I have to have these done. Here's the paper. Would you sign it? I promise you I'll do the hours this weekend. And of course, you know what happened? I signed it and he never did the hours. So I vowed from that day on, I would never sign a paper unless someone had done their hours. So we don't like being played and used. We'd much rather people be honest with us, so that we can work with them. Okay, and then finally, this is all about framing. It's about the formula for showing impact. And it's about, if you remember back to Forbes, the wow, and the future, it's about showing what you did, what you learned, what you accomplished, what skills you utilized, and what you took away from that experience as a volunteer, and how this makes you a much more valuable person, employee, whatever you want to call it, in the future, because now I've sharpened my skills. I'm going to use them too. Now that I've learned this about humanity or whatever skill set, a particular soft skill, maybe I'm going to be a better what? Now that I was able to accomplish this, I can utilize this to accomplish in the future. So it's all about framing. And we know that volunteering is good for you. It's a wonderful activity, but it can also work for people in furthering their careers, in getting the job they want, getting into the colleges they want to get into, if they will actually frame it in a way that speaks to what the person on the other end is looking for, what qualities, what leadership skills, what value you bring. And volunteering is honestly all about growth, learning, value. So it's the perfect accompaniment to work history and other, things that are put on resumes or in LinkedIn profiles to show, what a valuable human being you are.
I hope you found that helpful. I know I did. Now, Meridian was really kind enough to stick around and answer some questions. Here we go. I have some questions here I thought I'd pitch out, and if people want to throw some things in the chat or kind of speak up themselves, that'd be great if you have a couple minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, good. Well, the first one that comes to mind, I mean, I have talked to people who say, well, I don't want to volunteer because I'm looking for a job and I want to focus on that, and they don't, they kind of see it as an either or sort of situation. Yeah. What's your response to that?
Oh my gosh, thanks, Matt. My response to that is, okay, you're looking for a job. Do you want to have a leg up on your competition? If you want to have a leg up, then show initiative, show that you're a problem solver, show that, again, you have value, show you utilize your skills, show, show you care about the community in which you are working, and that you are willing to, expand your horizons. I mean, all of these things, and just frame it that way. I mean, it's all about the framing, honestly, to me. And so if you volunteer, and you go to a volunteer manager and you say, you know what, I'm looking for a job. I'd like to enhance my skills in X, Y, or Z. That volunteer manager is going to try and find a spot for you and help you frame that in such a way that you'll get a job. We want you to succeed. We don't want to say, oh, I hope you don't get a job so you just languish here. No, we want you to succeed, and we're going to help you in any way, shape, or form we can, within the confines of what we can and cannot do.
Yeah.
So I would say to them, volunteering is going to give you, my friend, a leg up.
And it's okay, I imagine, to go in and say, listen, I'm between jobs.
Yes.
I want to do something, but I may not be like full-time committed for the rest of my life with you.
Exactly, because here's how we look at it too, Matt. We look at it this way. If you're a volunteer and you come in and you give us, 6 weeks, maybe once a week, couple hours a week, and you go off and you do a job and you say, I got a job now, we're going to go, yay. And we're not going to go, oh, well, what happens to your volunteering? We're going to go, yay. But you know what? We want to keep you as part of our advocacy groups, meaning you are now going to go out and you're going to speak glowingly about our volunteer program and our organization. That's what we want in return. And so that's something, if you never set foot in our organization again, it's okay, because you're out there, hopefully, speaking well of us, referring people to us, talking about how we need donations. So you, believe it or not, you're not volunteering anymore in a formal sense, but you're one of us. So yeah, we never look at it as a lose. It's not a lose. We've got another advocate in our midst, hopefully.
That's great. And that's a real important message for people to hear, because I know I get that a lot. It's like folks are just, well, if I can't do it forever, I can't do it. And it's like, no. Plus there's the psychological benefits of volunteering, of just taking a break out of your job search and doing something meaningful.
Exactly. And maybe 3 years. I had a lady once, I walked into the lobby of our hospice care center and she said, I told you I'd be back. And this was 7 years later.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, you did tell me that. I know you. Sure enough, people have timetables, and we're okay with that. And if they never come back, they're still advocates. And
now, and another excuse I hear from folks is, well, I don't want to volunteer because I'm afraid of the liability thing. What if I do something wrong and somebody's going to come at me and sue me or something?
I can only speak for the state of Florida. We have what's called the Sunshine Act, and that prohibits suing people who are volunteering. But I would say to that person, ask the volunteer coordinator, your manager, what is the liability? Because that is one of our responsibilities as volunteer managers, to understand the law. And if you are officially a volunteer, in other words, you sign papers, we have agreed to take you in, you are protected by the organization's liability, insurance and liabilities. Yes, you are. But beyond all that, beyond the legal ramifications, which is you are no different than a staff member in many, many ways, which means you're protected. But if it becomes like a more of an emotional liability, like, oh, I don't want to do anything wrong. Okay, well then ask to be mentored, ask to shadow another volunteer, ask to have the volunteer manager walk you through. I mean, we're willing. I had a volunteer who took 2 years to get comfortable. We had to walk him through it, and he became a great volunteer. But he had great trepidation, and that's okay,
Well, and you bring up a good point, though, about volunteers being treated very much like staff members.
Yes.
And I guess the same thing would apply, if they do something absolutely stupid, in terms of all the things that we know are inappropriate in a workplace, then there are ramifications to that. So that, and a lot of states have these laws, like these volunteer protection clauses, but those I don't know what you'd call them, but I just think of stupid things aren't included necessarily in that. If you if one of your people would have abused a patient or something,
Mhm.
That's different. But if they're doing everything that you're showing them is appropriate to the job, that's not an issue at all.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's kind of off topic in a sense, but that's why volunteer managers and voluntary organizations need to have policies and procedures. I was
Yep.
very diligent about policies and procedures. You cannot do this, you cannot do that, and I would have people sign it. Now, how good is that? I mean, it's only as good as the legal team. So, but at least that's something. And at least it implants in the mind of the person. You're not here to do harm.
Well,
Um,
but that's a good point, because and I think it is pertinent to what we're talking about, because
mhm.
look for organizations that have a framework
Yes.
for their volunteering, that have these things in place. Those are going to be the better nonprofits anyhow. And that can give the volunteer some assurance that, yeah, you're not just kind of flying by the seat of your pants. There's processes that are important, that you take your mission seriously enough to have those in place.
Yeah. And just because a volunteer is not paid doesn't mean that we don't expect certain behaviors and certain, do's and don'ts there. Absolutely. Everyone is, and it all just always goes back to the mission. We're here to serve the mission. We're here because we believe in what we're doing. Therefore, we will do no harm. And it doesn't matter who you are, you will do no harm.
Now,
Um,
Colleen asked a really good question, which is, should you look for a job description? Should organizations give you something laid out? It's like, this is what we
yes,
expect of you.
absolutely.
Okay.
Because think about it as this: if I take you on as a volunteer, and I just say, okay, you're going to go work over here, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
What am I expected to do? What shouldn't I do? So yes, that goes back to policies and procedures. You should have a very succinct job description. What is expected of me? Doesn't mean that you can't go with outside that realm and maybe do something else as well.
Well, like any job description has that, do other jobs as assigned, right?
Well,
So,
and honestly, this is just me. When I wrote job descriptions, I never put that in for volunteers
ah,
and I'll tell you why. Because what does that really mean?
mhm.
For a volunteer, I don't know, that could open doors to all kinds of just really abusive things for them, like, oh yeah, the supervisor of the department expects you to stay, till midnight or something. I mean, that's kind of, off,
Right.
yeah, like kind of far out, but it does, or it gives also the impression that you can kind of do what you want, which
Right.
no,
Yeah,
no,
that's
no, no, no.
well,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I've, at least in my own experience working with volunteers, is I came up with what I thought of as a covenant. So it wasn't
Mhm.
just a job description from us as an organization, what we want from you, but what should you expect from us? Because this is a kind of an exchange relationship. We should be treating you reasonably. You should not be
Right.
subject to harassment. You shouldn't we'll write you do your job well. We're happy to recommend you the things, things like that.
Oh,
uh
exactly. Yeah, I had I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
no,
but I
please.
I had the volunteer bill of rights, which is kind of a
Yeah.
crazy way to term it, but basically, yes, and you're right. It's a contract between a person and an organization as to what you will provide, but what you will be protected from and what you can expect. And also, there has to be a chain of command in which
Mhm.
you have grievances that you can air. And that becomes so important that the volunteer knows, who do I go to? What do I do? If something is amiss in my world.
Now, with that same kind of structure,
Mhm.
I'm also asked by one of our participants about orientation. I mean, should orientation be expected? Is that something? And what does
Yes.
that include? I mean, is it just like getting to know you? And gee, isn't that nice? You have children, and you did this in your life, or is there more to it than that?
Thank you for that question, because, I know we're moving towards shorter and shorter orientations. Why are we doing that? Because, okay, attention span is shortening in society because there's so many avenues in which people can volunteer informally, meaning not with any organization, without all the hassle, if you will, of going through the hoops that you need to go through. But and as I, in my career, as I went through these changes, I tried to figure out how could I still, because I'm a big believer in orientation. I'm a big believer in giving the volunteer the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah.
So,
And that, I'm sorry if I may, and that's not
no,
just the training tools, that's actually the tools, the stuff they need.
yes, yes. So I started carving things into, well, you can be this kind of a volunteer, sort of an entry-level volunteer based on a short amount of training, all the way up to you can then add to it. And that seemed to work really well. And you can call it orientation, this additional training, or you could actually just consider it additional training or education. So I started breaking it down into, an introductory session, 3 hours, and that's more than 90 minutes, which a lot of places do 90 minutes.
Mhm.
But I did 3 hours. I wanted people to get to know one another. Another thing about doing a little bit longer session up front is the fact that they get to know each other, and
Yeah.
that camaraderie is so important with volunteers.
Mhm.
You're new to the place, and you know how it is, how it feels to be a new staff member. Oh my gosh, you're walking in new. Same thing for volunteers, and it's a little scarier for them too, because they're only there a certain amount of time a week. So I would have a little longer orientation, about 3 hours up front, and they'd get to know each other. A lot of it would be about interactive stuff, things like that. So they felt part of the team. And then from there, they could expand into longer orientation slash training slash, education, so that they would have the tools to do more in-depth volunteering. And that seemed to work out pretty good.
Well, actually, a couple things crossed my mind as you were talking there. I did a lot of work with the Boy Scouts, both as a volunteer and professionally, years gone by. And what you describe is pretty much how scouting worked in terms of training their adult leaders. You got kind of this introduction orientation thing, but then there were specific courses you could take that would get into detailed areas of whatever your responsibility was. And then there was this ultimate volunteer training program called Wood Badge that really got in depth into what scouting was all about and what the expectations were as a leader. And those really became the super leaders of scouting. Yeah, and then you're talking about the social aspects and connecting people together, which certainly this year has been an issue. But I remember back to a student I had years ago when I was teaching in Washington, who helped run the volunteer program for one of the Smithsonian museums. And she said that, these people, they were usually older people, they were docents, giving tours and all that, but they were their own group. They loved to connect with each other, and it was a social experience, every bit as much as dedication to the mission of whatever that museum was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really important to them. My wife also had the same experience when she managed a thrift store for a women's shelter near here. The people came in and they were stocking shelves and sorting clothing and all that, but they wanted to see each other and really connect socially.
Oh my gosh, that makes me laugh, because I managed a thrift store for a while, and I'm telling you, I laughed all day long with them. It was just me and the volunteers, and oh my gosh, we just had such a good time. So yeah, that was a real social experience.
Now, I had somebody ask me on the chat here to talk about volunteering to see if a career is right for them. Because a lot of people, especially in our group here, are considering moving out of whatever typically a business experience, maybe working with a nonprofit. Is there, is it, I know it isn't the same being a volunteer or a paid staff member, but is it a good way of making that transition?
Yes. And then with a caveat.
Okay.
Uh, in my career, I have seen a lot of volunteers move into a paid staff position, a lot. And that was great. And so what do you figure was the criteria for that? Well, they were good volunteers, they got to know staff liked them. It's kind of like having a temporary worker come in and you already know them and then you want to hire them, right? I mean, it's kind of the same thing, really. So yeah, I would say go ahead and, pursue that path. But there is a caveat. What I saw oftentimes with the volunteers who moved into staff was we in the volunteer department, and I had a big department of staff members who were volunteer managers, we treated you differently than you got treated as a staff member. And that was a rude awakening for some folks.
Yeah, there's an old joke about that, about people, when you become a transition from being a prospect to a real customer.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, now you're expected to produce. We didn't expect our volunteers to produce, but we were much more about coaching and mentoring and about you and whatnot. So then it became real. And then you start. Now, I was always really adamant about protecting volunteers from the politics of the organization. I still am. I hate to have volunteers get embroiled in any kind of politics, any kind of, personality conflicts with staff. No, that is not why they're there. And so once you volunteer, if your volunteer manager is very careful about that and shield you so that you just enjoy purely what the mission is about, and you move into the reality of being a staff member 40 hours a week, then you start to move, it becomes a job. And so I would just caution anybody, once you move into staff, it's a job. You have reports, you have, you've got all this stuff that you have to do. You have to put up with the meetings, you have to put up with the nonsense from just, human beings are human beings. And that's, so if you can navigate that, great.
Yeah. Now, one of our folks on the call here asked about volunteering in a remotely, even as we're kind of seem like we're coming out of the pandemic. We'll be finding out. Is it how do you connect to those opportunities to volunteer remotely?
Well, you can definitely look for. Look at some like Volunteer Match. There's all kinds of different volunteer sites. You can look on the volunteer page of any website of a major organization or even local organizations, see what they have to offer. But I would take that with a grain of salt and just think about what you have to offer. What can you do remotely? Here's one thing I did with remote volunteers way back in the day. We had all kinds of patients. And again, I can speak mainly from a hospice standpoint, but we had all kinds of patients. Okay, so let's just say I had patient Hilda, who grew up in Germany. All right, so I had remote volunteers, and typically they were students, but I had remote volunteers who I would tell them, I wouldn't give them personal information about the patient, but I would say, I need some research done on Germany, on, the Black Forest, blah, 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 back in, 1930, whatever.
Yeah.
And they would send me pictures and information and whatnot. I would send those along to our social workers who could go in and start those conversation starters were amazing, do you recognize this? Oh my gosh, and they were great tools for our social workers, nurses, other volunteers. I would give them to our volunteers and they would go in and sit and have wonderful conversations with people about their childhood.
Somebody mentioned I'm sorry, somebody mentioned online here, Catch a Fire, which is a remote volunteering kind of thing where
Right.
I guess the organizations post their needs and then people come in and are able to just take on assignments. But that actually, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I will say, oftentimes organizations don't know they need what they don't know they need.
That's
So
true.
if you have an idea, I've had so many volunteers come to me and say, I've got this idea for whatnot, and it turned out to be amazing. I never thought of it. So, don't necessarily think that whatever they're listing is all that can be done. Everybody wants to improve, everybody wants to do better and more. So,
Yeah.
if you have a good idea and you're willing to take on some of the burden of piloting this program. I had pilot programs like, Oreos has cookies, and obviously some didn't work out, but you never know until you try. So if you have an idea, if you see something and you go, you know what, this could be good and I could do that virtually, approach an organization with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you find, um, uh, well, I'm sorry, somebody's saying here regarding finding volunteer opportunities, um, let me go read the whole thing here. Prior to everything being online, people used to network in person and do that, which is right, and there are even groups like ours where people can trade ideas about volunteer opportunities. But how do you find you've never been involved? Like, I will tell you, I have a family that's related to us who has never, I don't think, touched a nonprofit, except for the local hospital, which they really have more of a transactional relationship with it. I don't think they ever deal with nonprofit in their life. If somebody were like that, wanting to say, well, maybe I'll volunteer because I'm between things, how do you actually identify an organization? How do you find these people?
I would say interview or as a perspective.
No, but
uh,
I'm thinking, is it like go to maybe Chamber of Commerce
oh
lists, or
oh
how do you?
um, I would start with Volunteer Match.
Okay.
You can go to Volunteer Match. It's nationwide. They're the largest conglomerate of, volunteering opportunities
Hmm.
in the country. Go to Volunteer Match. You can go to your local United Way.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
You can, at Chamber of Commerce, maybe it depends upon what organizations are part of the Chamber of Commerce
Mhm.
and how much they actually do that. I would look at websites. I would just Google volunteer opportunities near me and see what pops up, because a lot of municipalities and counties will have their own volunteering websites and things. So yeah, just kind of peruse all this and then start thinking about, again, what you're interested in, what skills that you have, and then I would definitely interview
Yeah.
organizations. What do you'll get a sense, like, almost right away of, will this work for me? you
So a
know
couple more questions. We'll let you off the hook here. um, what's the biggest mistake that volunteers make in terms of them approaching, or just even getting connected, or maybe even just walking in there? I mean, what is there something that, like, oh my gosh, don't ever do, whatever this is?
um Oddly enough, I think the biggest mistake, and I'll probably think of one later, but I think the biggest mistake is in not wanting to make this about a partnership. And what I mean by that is being hesitant, just simply accepting what you see on paper, just simply saying, well, who am I? I have no, this is charity work, oh, hands off. No, no.
Hmm,
Um, I think the biggest mistake is in not looking out for your own interests and
very interesting.
realizing that we're okay with that. We want you to. I think the biggest mistake is misconceptions about volunteering, which is, oh, I'm nothing but, extra set of hands. No, no. So go into it with eyes open and what you need out of it, and be honest about that, and be looking, what am I going to get here? There is no shame in that, and no one expects you to be nothing but a gopher.
Well, that's really good. That's excellent advice, because I mean, the part you said about bringing in your perspective, really resonates with me, because I used to work a lot with boards, and I would marvel sometimes at how really sharp business people would take their brain out of their head when they showed up at a board meeting, and wouldn't apply it necessarily to the organization they were on the board of. Uh,
Yeah. There's this misnomer, and maybe it's not so much anymore, but there's a misnomer that everybody who works for a charity organization or is a volunteer at a charity organization is some sort of saint. You know,
hmm.
no,
Wait,
no,
wait, you mean that
we're
halo I
people.
see behind your head there, isn't?
We are people, we're just like everybody else. So, you can't come in with this attitude like, oh, in hushed tones and, oh, I've got to be on my best behavior. And well, yeah, you do, but, but we want authenticity. We want you, we don't want some robot.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah,
now somebody just asked a question which is actually on my list, but I'm really glad, because they kind of got a little beyond what I was going to ask here. So, have you had an experience needing to decline help from a particular individual, or even fire them? I was going to ask about firing, but I'd like the decline help.
yes, no, yes. And as a quote unquote decent human being, I guess that was the hardest thing for me to
Yeah.
learn, that you have to, because yes, and the answer is yes. And many times, does it get easier? No, not really. It's
Hmm.
horrible. I hate it. You hate to turn down someone, you hate to ask someone to leave when they have offered you help. I mean, that's just horrible, right?
Yeah.
So, but I'll tell you what, ignoring it, hoping it goes away, hoping things will work out on their own. No, you have to be proactive. So yes, the answer is yes. I've fired people. I've declined their help. I've done all kinds of that, just crummy stuff that you don't want to have to do, but you have to. And the thing is, you have to put the needs and the safety and the considerations of the people you are serving first.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, we all have to fit under that umbrella. I can't go around, as a staff person doing anything I want, or acting in any way I want, or having an agenda, or pushing products, or whatever the heck it is. And I've had all of that stuff. And you have to just view it that way. You don't view it as being a tyrant, and you don't view it as you view it as, I'm doing this for the good of the people we serve. And this is part of our mission, as to not do harm. So you cannot allow people to do harm. You just can't. There is no, it's black and white. There is no allowance for this. Hoping that it'll go away. No.
Well,
So,
this is the same attitude I'd take in fundraising, which is it's not about the money, it's about the people we serve.
exactly.
And when you put them first, the whole thing actually lines up really well.
Right.
But sometimes it's hard to believe that, or to kind of grasp that. It's interesting, through all this, I find that your job as a volunteer manager is in large part an HR job,
Mhm.
where it's just that you're not dealing with how people are getting paid, but you're dealing with a lot of the other stuff that a good HR person would.
You have to, because the volunteer team is a workforce. They're
Yeah.
doing work, they're just not getting paid, but they're
Yeah.
doing the work. And so we have to reward them in a way that makes sense to them, which is impact and meaning, and treating them with respect and decency. But we also have to expect from, and you know what? I mean, there's many studies, Matt, done all over the place, where when you expect more from people, they will do more. And
Yeah.
I don't mean by giving more hours, I mean as in we expect goodness from you. We expect decency from you. And they will do that because it's expected. And that actually elevates their position into, not just any rinky-dink person can walk in here and have their way. I'm part of a group that takes this seriously
Yeah.
and does good work. So yeah.
Well, it also increases their commitment too. When you have
Exactly.
expectations and they meet that expectation, they become more committed to your organization.
Right.
And that makes a big difference. Well,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, people are there. A couple of folks have said they're moving to doing job interviews right now and all this. Anything
Hey.
last call for questions among the audience, and any last words from yourself?
This is Angela. I just wanted to say excellent, Meridian. It was a wonderful
Thanks.
presentation. I took so many notes. Like everybody who knows me knows I take notes, but yours, excellent. And I really loved how you framed the creating your own ROI. Because
Good.
it's just so important to be able to demonstrate if you are interviewing, to be able to frame your work and translating into the skills that the company is also needing. And I'd like to just share my own experience that because I volunteer with this group, and Lynn, I mean, she's just been instrumental for me. I was able to use my volunteering for the group and first of all, fill the gaps in my skills that I didn't have for a job that I was interviewing for. And I really believe that that pushed me over the edge. And so on Monday, I'm starting at my dream job. Yes, for your part-time controller who offers controllership and accounting services to nonprofits. So
Excellent.
I am a testament to everything that you said in your presentation, and Lynn and the group was just instrumental for me to be able to do that. And
Great.
yeah,
it's all about networking your way to your next job, and that's exactly how that happened.
yeah.
Well, we got you on tape now, so we're gonna.
Well, it's all true. It's all true.
Can't take it back.
I really love the fact that just using this particular group, the Philadelphia Area Great Careers Group, there are so many areas, not just the accounting part that I did, but marketing, computer skills, data management. I mean, it's so many areas that people can use, and then creating these ROIs that you mentioned to help fill the gaps, fill their time gaps and fill their skills gaps, those two areas. And really, I think it just makes an impression to your new employer. So.
Wow.
Absolutely. Good for you, Angela. Thank you.
And
I also want to, go ahead.
Well, before I forget, I was going to say, I apologize. I did not put my email in there, and it's volunteerplaintalk@gmail.com. Really simple. If you have volunteer experience or a volunteer, thing that you've done, and you want me to help you put that into an ROI or a formula, feel free to reach out and say, hey, this is what I did, and we'll figure out how to make that. I'd be happy to.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Well, I want to, we've already taken so much of your time, and this has been great. And obviously people are getting a lot from it. Thank you so much for helping out with this and for offering your wisdom here. This has really been tremendous.
It's been wonderful.
Thanks for being with us. And I hope you enjoyed today's presentation with Meridian Swift of Volunteer Plain Talk. And this is Matt Hugg wishing you a great nonprofit day.